Modern India. The Vedic priests based their superior strength on the knowledge of the sacrificial mantras, Vedic hymns uttered by the priests to invoke the devas at the time of sacrifice. By the power of these mantras, the devas are made to come down from their heavenly abodes, accept the drink and food offerings, and grant the prayers of the Yajamanas, the men who perform sacrifices. The kings as well as their subjects are therefore looking up to these priests for their welfare during their earthly life. Raja Soma, the name of the Soma plant as commonly found in the Vedas. The priests offered to the devas the juice of this plant at the time of sacrifice, is worshipped by the priest and is made to thrive by the power of his mantras. As such, the devas whose favorite food is the juice of the Soma plant offered in oblation by the priest are always kind to him and bestow his desired boons. Thus, strengthened by divine grace, he defies all human opposition. For what can the power of mortals do against that of the gods? Even the king, the center of all earthly power, is a supplicant at his door. A kind look from him is the greatest help, his mere blessing a tribute to the state, preeminent above everything else. Now commanding the king to be engaged in affairs fraught with death and ruin, now standing by him as his fastest friend with kind and wise counsels, now spreading the net of subtle diplomatic statesmanship in which the king is easily caught. The priest is seen oftentimes to make the royal power totally subservient to him. Above all, the worst fear is in the knowledge that the name and fame of the royal forefathers and of himself and his family lie at the mercy of the priest's pen. He is the historian. The king might have paramount power, attaining a great glory in his reign. He might prove himself as the father and mother in one to his subjects. But if the priest is not appeased, his sun of glory goes down with his last breath forever. All his worth and usefulness deserving of universal approbation are lost in the great womb of time, like unto the fall of gentle dew on the ocean. Others who inaugurated the huge sacrifices lasting over many years, the performers of the Ashwamedha and so on, those who showered, like incessant rain in the rainy season, countless wealth on the priests, their names, thanks to the grace of priests, are emblazoned in the pages of history. The name of Priyadarshi Dharmashoka, the name given to the great king Ashoka after he embraced Buddhism, the beloved of the gods, is nothing but a name in the priestly world, while Janamejaya, the performer of the great snake sacrifice of Mahabharata, son of Parikshit, is a household word in every Hindu family. To protect the state, to meet the expenses of the personal comforts and luxuries of himself and his long retinue, and above all, to fill to overflowing the coffers of the all powerful priesthood for its propitiation, the king is continually draining the resources of his subjects, even as the sun sucks up moisture from the earth. His special prey, his milch cows, are the Vaishyas. Neither under the Hindu kings nor under the Buddhist rule do we find the common subject people taking any part in expressing their voice in the affairs of the state. True, Yudhishthira visits the houses of Vaishyas and even Shudras when he is in Varanavata. True, the subjects are praying for the installation of Ramachandra to the regency of Ayodhya. Nay, they are even criticizing the conduct of Sita and secretly making plans for the bringing about of her exile. But as a recognized rule of the state, they have no direct voice in the supreme government. The power of the populace is struggling to express itself in indirect and disorderly ways without any method. The people have not as yet the conscious knowledge of the existence of this power. There is neither the attempt on their part to organize it into a united action, nor have they got the will to do so. There is also a complete absence of that capacity, that skill, by means of which small and incoherent centers of force are united together, creating insuperable strength as their resultant. Is this due to want of proper laws? No, that is not it. There are laws, there are methods, separately and distinctly assigned for the guidance of different departments of government. There are laws laid down in the minutest detail for everything, such as the collection of revenue, the management of the army, the administration of justice, punishments and rewards. But at the root of all is the injunction of the Rishi, the word of divine authority. the revelation of God coming through the inspired rishi. The laws have, it can almost be said, no elasticity in them. Under the circumstances, it is never possible for the people to acquire any sort of education by which they can learn to combine among themselves and be united for the accomplishment of any object for the common good of the people, or by which they can have the concerted intellect to conceive the idea of popular right in the treasures collected by the king from his subjects, or even such education by which they can be fired with the aspiration to gain the right of representation in the control of state revenues and expenditure. Why should they do such things? Is not the inspiration of the rishi responsible for their prosperity and progress? Again, all those laws are in books. Between laws as codified in books and their operation in practical life, there is a world of difference. One Ramachandra is born after thousands of Agnivarnas pass away. Many kings show us the life of Chanda Shoka. Dharma Shokas are rare. The number of kings like Akbar, in whom the subjects find their life, is far less than that of kings like Aurangzeb, who live on the blood of their people. Even if the kings be of as godlike nature as that of Yudhishthira, Ramachandra, Dharmashoka, or Akbar, under whose benign rule the people enjoyed safety and prosperity, and were looked after with paternal care by their rulers, the hand of him who is always fed by another gradually loses the power of taking the food to his mouth. His power of self preservation can never become fully manifest, who is always protected in every respect by another. Even the strongest youth remains but a child if he is always looked after as a child by his parents. Being always governed by kings of godlike nature, to whom is left the whole duty of protecting and providing for the people, they can never get any occasion for understanding the principles of self government. Such a nation, being entirely dependent on the king for everything and never caring to exert itself for the common good or for self defense, becomes gradually destitute of inherent energy and strength. If this state of dependence and protection continues long, it becomes the cause of the destruction of the nation, and its ruin is not far to seek. Of course, it can be reasonably concluded that when the government of a country is guided by codes of laws enjoined by Shastras, which are the outcome of knowledge inspired by the divine genius of great sages, such a government must lead to the unbroken welfare of the rich and the poor, the wise and the ignorant, the king and the subjects alike. But we have seen already how far the operation of those laws was, or may be, possible in practical life. The voice of the ruled in the government of their land, which is the watchword of the modern Western world, and of which the last expression has been echoed with a thundering voice in the declaration of the American government, in the words, that the government of the people of this country must be by the people and for the good of the people, cannot, however, be said to have been totally unrecognized in ancient India. The Greek travelers and others saw many independent small states scattered all over this country, and references are also found to this effect in many places of the Buddhistic literature. And there cannot be the least doubt about it that the germ of self government was at least present in the shape of the village panchayat, literally, government by five, in which the village men sit together and decide among themselves all disputes, which is still to be found in existence in many places of India. But the germ remained forever the germ. The seed, though put in the ground, never grew into a tree. This idea of self government never passed beyond the embryo state of the village panchayat system and never spread into society at large. In the religious communities, among sannyasins in the Buddhist monasteries, we have ample evidence to show that self government was fully developed. Even now, one wonders to see how the power of the panchayat system of the principles of self government is working amongst the Naga sannyasins. What deep respect the government by the five commands from them, what effective individual rights each Naga can exercise within his own sect, what excellent working of the power of organization and concerted action they have among themselves. With the deluge which swept the land at the advent of Buddhism, the priestly power fell into decay and the royal power was in the ascendant. Buddhist priests are renouncers of the world, living in monasteries as homeless ascetics, unconcerned with secular affairs. They have neither the will nor the endeavor to bring and keep the royal power under their control through the threat of curses or magic arrows. Even if there were any remnant of such a will, its fulfillment has now become an impossibility. For Buddhism has shaken the thrones of all the oblation eating gods and brought them down from their heavenly positions. The state of being a Buddha is superior to the heavenly positions of many a Brahma or an Indra, who vie with each other in offering their worship at the feet of the Buddha, the God man. And to this Buddhahood, every man has the privilege to attain. It is open to all even in this life. From the descent of the gods, as a natural consequence, the superiority of the priests who were supported by them is gone. Accordingly, the reins of that mighty sacrificial horse, the royal power, are no longer held in the firm grasp of the Vedic priest, and being now free, it can roam anywhere by its unbridled will. The center of power in this period is neither with the priests chanting the Sama hymns and performing the yajnas according to the Yajur Veda, nor is the power vested in the hands of Kshatriya kings, separated from each other and ruling over small independent states. But the center of power in this age is in emperors whose unobstructed sway extend over vast areas bounded by the ocean, covering the whole of India from one end to the other. The leaders of this age are no longer Vishwamitra or Vasishtha, but emperors like Chandragupta, Dharmashoka, and others. There never were emperors who ascended the throne of India and led her to the pinnacle of her glory, such as those lords of the earth who ruled over her in paramount sway during the Buddhistic period. The end of this period is characterized by the appearance of Rajput power on the scene and the rise of modern Hinduism. With the rise of Rajput power, on the decline of Buddhism, the scepter of the Indian Empire, dislodged from its paramount power, was again broken into 1,000 pieces and wielded by small powerless hands. At this time, the Brahminical priestly power again succeeded in raising its head, not as an adversary as before, but this time as an auxiliary to the royal supremacy. During this revolution, that perpetual struggle for supremacy between the priestly and the royal classes, which began from the Vedic times and continued through ages till it reached its climax at the time of the Jain and Buddhist revolutions, has ceased forever. Now, these two mighty powers are friendly to each other, but neither is there any more that glorious Kshatra, warlike valor of the kings, nor that spiritual brilliance which characterized the Brahmins. Each has lost his former intrinsic strength. As might be expected, this new union of the two forces was soon engaged in the satisfaction of mutual self interests and became dissipated by spending its vitality on extirpating their common opponents, especially the Buddhists of the time, and on similar other deeds. Being steeped in all the vices consequent on such a union, example, the sucking of the blood of the masses, taking revenge on the enemy, spoliation of others' property, etc., they in vain tried to imitate the Rajasuya and other Vedic sacrifices of the ancient kings, and only made a ridiculous farce of them. The result was that they were bound hand and foot by a formidable train of sycophantic attendants and its obsequious flatteries, and being entangled in an interminable net of rites and ceremonies, with flourishes of mantras and the like, they soon became a cheap and ready prey to the Mohammedan invaders from the west. That priestly power which began its strife for superiority with the royal power from the Vedic times and continued it down the ages, that hostility against the Kshatriya power, Bhagavan Sri Krishna succeeded by his superhuman genius in putting a stop to, at least for the time being, during his earthly existence. That Brahmanya power was almost effaced from its field of work in India during the Jain and Buddhist revolutions, or perhaps was holding its feeble stand by being subservient to the strong antagonistic religions. The Brahmanya power, since this appearance of Rajput power which held sway over India under the Mihira dynasty and others, made its last effort to recover its lost greatness, and in its effort to establish that supremacy, it sold itself at the feet of the fierce hordes of barbarians newly come from Central Asia, and to win their pleasure introduced in the land their hateful manners and customs. Moreover, it, the Brahmanya power, solely devoting itself to the easy means to dupe ignorant barbarians, brought into vogue mysterious rites and ceremonies backed by its new mantras and the like, and in doing so itself lost its former wisdom, its former vigor and vitality, and its own chaste habits of long acquirement. Thus it turned the whole Aryavarta into a deep and vast whirlpool of the most vicious, the most horrible, the most abominable barbarous customs. And as the inevitable consequence of countenancing these detestable customs and superstitions, it soon lost all its own internal strength and stamina, and became the weakest of the weak. What wonder that it should be broken into 1,000 pieces and fall at the mere touch of the storm of Mussulman invasions from the west? The great Brahmanya power fell, who knows if ever to rise again? The resuscitation of the priestly power under the Mussulman rule was, on the other hand, an utter impossibility. The Prophet Muhammad himself was dead against the priestly class in any shape and tried his best for the total destruction of this power by formulating rules and injunctions to that effect. Under the Mussulman rule, the king himself was the supreme priest. He was the chief guide in religious matters, and when he became the emperor, he cherished the hope of being the paramount leader in all matters over the whole Mussulman world. To the Mussulman, the Jews or the Christians are not objects of extreme detestation. They are, at the worst, men of little faith. But not so the Hindu. According to him, the Hindu is idolatrous, the hateful kafir. Hence, in this life, he deserves to be butchered, and in the next, eternal hell is in store for him. The utmost the Mussulman kings could do as a favor to the priestly class, the spiritual guides of these kafirs, was to allow them somehow to pass their lives silently and wait for the last moment. This was again sometimes considered too much kindness. If the religious ardor of any kind was a little more uncommon, there would immediately follow arrangements for a great yajna by way of kafir slaughter. On one side, the royal power is now centered in kings professing a different religion and given to different customs. On the other, the priestly power has been entirely displaced from its influential position as the controller and lawgiver of the society. The Quran and its code of laws have taken the place of the Dharma Shastras of Manu and others. The Sanskrit language has made room for the Persian and the Arabic. The Sanskrit language has to remain confined only to the purely religious writings and religious matters of the conquered and detested Hindu, and as such has since been living a precarious life at the hands of the neglected priest. The priest himself, the relic of the Brahmanya power, fell back upon the last resource of conducting only the comparatively unimportant family ceremonies, such as the matrimonial, etc., and that also only so long as much as the mercy of the Mohammedan rulers permitted. In the Vedic and the adjoining periods, the royal power could not manifest itself on account of the grinding pressure of the priestly power. We have seen how during the Buddhistic revolution, resulting in the fall of the Brahminical supremacy, the royal power in India reached its culminating point. In the interval between the fall of the Buddhistic and the establishment of the Mohammedan Empire, we have seen how the royal power was trying to raise its head through the Rajputs in India, and how it failed in its attempt. At the root of this failure, too, could be traced the same old endeavors of the Vedic priestly class to bring back and revive with a new life their original ritualistic days. Crushing the Brahminical supremacy under his feet, the Mussulman king was able to restore to a considerable extent the lost glories of such dynasties of emperors as the Maurya, the Gupta, the Andhra, and the Kshatrapa, the Persian governors of Aryavarta and Gujarat. Thus, the priestly power, which sages like Kumarila, Shankara, and Ramanuja tried to re establish, which for some time was supported by the sword of the Rajput power, and which tried to rebuild its structure on the fall of its Jain and Buddhist adversaries, was under Mohammedan rule laid to sleep forever, knowing no awakening. In this period, the antagonism or warfare is not between kings and priests, but between kings and kings. At the end of this period, when Hindu power again raised its head and to some extent was successful in regenerating Hinduism through the Maharathas and the Sikhs, we do not find much play of the priestly power with these regenerations. On the contrary, when the Sikhs admitted any Brahmin into their sect, they at first compelled him publicly to give up his previous Brahminical signs and adopt the recognized signs of their own religion. In this manner, after an age long play of action and reaction between these two forces, The final victory of the royal power was echoed on the soil of India for several centuries in the name of foreign monarchs professing an entirely different religion from the faith of the land. But at the end of this Mohammedan period, another entirely new power made its appearance on the arena and slowly began to assert its prowess in the affairs of the Indian world. This power is so new, its nature and workings are so foreign to the Indian mind, its rise so inconceivable, and its vigor so insuperable that though it wields the suzerain power up till now, only a handful of Indians understand what this power is. We are talking of the occupation of India by England. From very ancient times, the fame of India's vast wealth and her rich granaries has enkindled in many powerful foreign nations the desire for conquering her. She has been, in fact, again and again conquered by foreign nations. Then why should we say that the occupation of India by England was something new and foreign to the Indian mind? From time immemorial, Indians have seen the mightiest royal power tremble before the frown of the ascetic priest, devoid of worldly desire, armed with spiritual strength, the power of mantras, sacred formulas, and religious lore, and the weapon of curses. They have also seen the subject people silently obey the commands of their heroic all power suzerains, backed by their arms and armies like a flock of sheep before a lion. But that a handful of Vaishyas, traders, who, despite their great wealth, have ever crouched awe stricken not only before the king, but also before any member of the royal family, would unite, cross for purposes of business rivers and seas, would solely by virtue of their intelligence and wealth, by degrees make puppets of the long established Hindu and Mohammedan dynasties. Not only so, but that they would buy as well as the services of the ruling powers of their own country and use their valor and learning as powerful instruments for the influx of their own riches. This is a spectacle entirely novel to the Indians, as also the spectacle that the descendants of the mighty nobility of a country of which a proud lord, sketched by the extraordinary pen of its great poet, says to a common man, "Out, dunghill, darest thou brave a noble man?" would in no distant future consider it the zenith of human ambition to be sent to India as obedient servants of a body of merchants called the East India Company. Such a sight was indeed a novelty unseen by India before. According to the prevalence, in greater or lesser degree, of the three qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas in man, the four castes, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, are everywhere present at all times in all civilized societies. By the mighty hand of time, their number and power also vary at different times in regard to different countries. In some countries, the numerical strength or influence of one of these castes may preponderate over another. At some period, one of the classes may be more powerful than the rest. But from a careful study of the history of the world, it appears that in conformity to the law of nature, the four castes, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, do in every society, one after another in succession, govern the world. Among the Chinese, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Aryas, the Iranians, the Jews, the Arabs, among all these ancient nations, the supreme power of guiding society is, in the first period of their history, in the hands of the Brahmin or the priest. In the second period, the ruling power is the Kshatriya, that is, either absolute monarchy or oligarchical government by a chosen body of men. Among the modern Western nations, with England at their head, this power of controlling society has been for the first time in the hands of the Vaishyas or mercantile communities made rich through the carrying on of commerce. Though Troy and Carthage of ancient times and Venice and similar other small commercial states of comparatively modern times became highly powerful, yet amongst them there was not the real rising of the Vaishya power in the proper sense of the term. Correctly speaking, the descendants of the royal family had the sole monopoly of the commerce of those old days by employing the common people and their servants under them to carry on the trade, and they appropriated to themselves the profits accruing from it. Excepting these few men, no one was allowed to take any part or voice an opinion even in the government of the country and kindred affairs. In the oldest countries like Egypt, the priestly power enjoyed unmolested supremacy only for a short period, after which it became subjugated to the royal power and lived as an auxiliary to it. In China, the royal power, centralized by the genius of Confucius, has been controlling and guiding the priestly power in accordance with its absolute will for more than 25 centuries. And during the last 2 centuries, the all absorbing lamas of Tibet, though they are the spiritual guides of the royal family, have been compelled to pass their days being subject in every way to the Chinese emperor. In India, the royal power succeeded in conquering the priestly power and declaring its untrammeled authority long after the other ancient civilized nations had done so. And therefore, the inauguration of the Indian Empire came about long after the Chinese, Egyptian, Babylonian, and other empires had risen. It was only with the Jewish people that the royal power, though it tried hard to establish its supremacy over the priestly, had to meet a complete defeat in the attempt. Not even the Vaishyas attained the ruling power with the Jews. On the other hand, the common subject people, trying to free themselves from the shackles of priestcraft, were crushed to death under the internal commotion of adverse religious movements like Christianity and the external pressure of the mighty Roman Empire. As in the ancient days, the priestly power, in spite of its long continued struggle, was subdued by the more powerful royal power, so in modern times, before the violent blow of the newly risen Vaishya power, many a kingly crown has to kiss the ground, many a scepter is forever broken to pieces. Only those few thrones which are allowed still to exercise some power in some of the civilized countries and make a display of their royal pomp and grandeur are all maintained solely by the vast hoards of wealth of these Vaishya communities, the dealers in salt, oil, sugar, and wine, and kept up as a magnificent and an imposing front, and as a means of glorification to the really governing body behind, the Vaishyas. That mighty newly risen Vaishya power, at whose command electricity carries messages in an instant from one pole to another, whose highway is the vast ocean, with its mountain high waves, at whose instance commodities are being carried with the greatest ease from one part of the globe to another, and at whose mandate even the greatest monarchs tremble on the white foamy crest of that huge wave, the all conquering Vaishya power is installed the majestic throne of England in all its grandeur. Therefore, the conquest of India by England is not a conquest by Jesus or the Bible, as we are often asked to believe. Neither is it like the conquest of India by the Mughals and the Pathans. But behind the name of the Lord Jesus, the Bible, the magnificent palaces, the heavy tramp of the feet of armies consisting of elephants, chariots, cavalry, and infantry, shaking the earth, the sounds of war trumpets, bugles, and drums, and the splendid display of the royal throne, behind all these, there is always the virtual presence of England, that England whose war flag is the factory chimney, whose troops are the merchantmen, whose battlefields are the marketplaces of the world, and whose empress is the shining goddess of fortune herself. It is on this account I have said before that it is indeed an unseen novelty, this conquest of India by England. What new revolution will be effected in India by her clash with the new giant power, and as the result of that revolution, what new transformation is in store for future India cannot be inferred from her past history. I have stated previously that the four castes, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, do in succession rule the world. During the period of supreme authority exercised by each of these castes, some acts are accomplished which conduce to the welfare of the people, while others are injurious to them. The foundation of the priestly power rests on intellectual strength and not on the physical strength of arms. Therefore, with the supremacy of the priestly power, there is a great prevalence of intellectual and literary culture. Every human heart is always anxious for communication with and help from the supersensuous spiritual world. The entrance to that world is not possible for the generality of mankind. Only a few great souls who can acquire a perfect control over their sense organs and who are possessed with a nature preponderating with the essence of Sattvaguna are able to pierce the formidable wall of matter and come face to face, as it were, with the supersensuous. It is only they who know the workings of the kingdom that bring the messages from it and show the way to others. These great souls are the priests, the primitive guides, leaders, and movers of human societies. The priest knows the gods and communicates with them. He is therefore worshipped as a god. Leaving behind the thoughts of the world, he has no longer to devote himself to the earning of his bread by the sweat of his brow. The best and foremost parts of all food and drink are due as offerings to the gods, and of these gods, the visible proxies on earth are the priests. It is through their mouths that they partake of the offerings. Knowingly or unknowingly, society gives the priest abundant leisure, and he can therefore get the opportunity of being meditative and of thinking higher thoughts. Hence, the development of wisdom and learning originates first with the supremacy of the priestly power. There stands the priest between the dreadful lion, the king, on the one hand, and the terrified flock of sheep, the subject people, on the other. The destructive leap of the lion is checked by the controlling rod of spiritual power in the hands of the priest. The flame of the despotic will of the king, maddened in the pride of his wealth and men, is able to burn into ashes everything that comes in his way. But it is only a word from the priest, who has neither wealth nor men behind him, but whose sole strength is his spiritual power, that can quench the despotic royal will as water the fire. With the ascendancy of the priestly supremacy are seen the first advent of civilization, the first victory of the divine nature over the animal, the first mastery of spirit over matter, and the first manifestation of the divine power which is potentially present in this very slave of nature, this lump of flesh, to wit, the human body. The priest is the first discriminator of spirit from matter, the first to help to bring this world in communion with the next, the first messenger from the gods to man, and the intervening bridge that connects the king with his subjects. The first offshoot of universal welfare and good is nursed by his spiritual power, by his devotion to learning and wisdom, by his renunciation, the watchword of his life, and watered even by the flow of his own life blood. It is therefore that in every land it was he to whom the first and foremost worship was offered. It is therefore that even his memory is sacred to us. There are evils as well. With the growth of life is sown simultaneously the seed of death. Darkness and light always go together. Indeed, there are great evils which, if not checked in proper time, lead to the ruin of society. The play of power through gross matter is universally experienced. Everyone sees, everyone understands. The mighty manifestation of gross material force as displayed in the play of battle axes and swords, or in the burning properties of fire and lightning. Nobody doubts these things, nor can there ever be any question about their genuineness. But where the repository of power and the center of its play are wholly mental, where the power is confined to certain special words, to certain special modes of uttering them, to the mental repetition of certain mysterious syllables, or to other similar processes and applications of the mind, there light is mixed with shade. There the ebb and flow naturally disturb the otherwise unshaken faith. And there, even when things are actually seen or directly perceived, still sometimes doubts arise as to their real occurrence. Where distress, fear, anger, malice, spirit of retaliation, and the like passions of man, leaving the palpable force of arms, leaving the gross material methods to gain the end in view which every one can understand, substitute in their stead the mysterious mental process like stambhana, Uchatana, Vashikarana, and Marana for their fructification. There, a cloud of smoky indistinctness, as it were, naturally envelops the mental atmosphere of these men who often live and move in such hazy worlds of obscure mysticism. No straight line of action presents itself before such a mind. Even if it does, the mind distorts it into crookedness. The final result of all this is insincerity, that very limited narrowness of the heart, and above all, the most fatal is the extreme intolerance born of malicious envy at the superior excellence of another. The priest naturally says to himself, why should I part with the power that has made the Devas subservient to me, has given me mastery over physical and mental illnesses, and has gained for me the service of ghosts, demons, and other unseen spirits? I have dearly bought this power by the price of extreme renunciation. Why should I give to others that, to get which I had to give up my wealth, name, fame, in short, all my earthly comforts and happiness? Again, that power is entirely mental. And how many opportunities are there of keeping it a perfect secret? Entangled in this wheel of circumstances, human nature becomes what it inevitably would. being used to practice constant self concealment, it becomes a victim of extreme selfishness and hypocrisy, and at last succumbs to the poisonous consequences which they bring in their train. In time, the reaction of this very desire to concealment rebounds upon oneself. All knowledge, all wisdom is almost lost for want of proper exercise and diffusion, and what little remains is thought to have been obtained from some supernatural source, and therefore, far from making fresh efforts to go in for originality and gain knowledge of new sciences, it is considered useless and futile to attempt even to improve the remnants of the old by cleansing them of their corruptions. Thus lost to former wisdom, the former indomitable spirit of self reliance, the priest, now glorifying himself merely in the name of his forefathers, vainly struggles to preserve untarnished for himself the same glory, the same privilege, the same veneration, and the same supremacy as was enjoyed by his great forefathers. Consequently, his violent collision with the other castes. According to the law of nature, wherever there is an awakening of a new and stronger life, there it tries to conquer and take the place of the old and the decaying. Nature favors the dying out of the unfit and the survival of the fittest. The final result of such conflict between the priestly and the other classes has been mentioned already. That renunciation, self control, and asceticism of the priest, which during the period of his ascendancy were devoted to the pursuance of earnest researches of truth, are on the eve of his decline, employed anew and spent solely in the accumulation of objects of self gratification and in the extension of privileged superiority over others. That power, the centralization of which in himself gave him all honor and worship, has now been dragged down from its high heavenly position to the lowest abyss of hell. Having lost sight of the goal, drifting aimless, the priestly power is entangled, like the spider, in the web spun by itself. The chain that has been forged from generation to generation with the greatest care to be put on others' feet is now tightened round its own in a thousand coils, and is thwarting its own movement in hundreds of ways. Caught in the endless thread of the net of infinite rites, ceremonies, and customs, which it spread on all sides as external means for purification of the body and the mind, with a view to keeping society in the iron grasp of these innumerable bonds, the priestly power, thus hopelessly entangled from head to foot, is now asleep in despair. There is no escaping out of it now. Tear the net, and the priesthood of the priest is shaken to its foundation. There is implanted in every man, naturally, a strong desire for progress, and those who, finding that the fulfillment of this desire is an impossibility so long as one is trammeled in the shackles of priesthood, rend this net and take to the profession of other castes in order to earn money thereby. Them, the society immediately dispossesses of their priestly rights. Society has no faith in the Brahminhood of the so called Brahmins, who, instead of keeping the shikha, the sacred tuft or lock of hair left on the crown of the head at tonsure, part their hair, who, giving up their ancient habits and ancestral customs, clothe themselves in semi European dress and adopt the newly introduced usages from the West in a hybrid fashion. Again, in those parts of India wherever this newcomer, the English government is introducing new modes of education and opening up new channels for the coming in of wealth, their hosts of Brahmin youths are giving up their hereditary priestly profession and trying to earn their livelihood and become rich by adopting the callings of other castes, with the result that the habits and customs of the priestly class, handed down from their distant forefathers, are scattered to the winds and are fast disappearing from the land. In Gujarat, each secondary sect of the Brahmins is divided into two subdivisions, one being those who still stick to the priestly profession, while the other lives by other professions. There only the first subdivisions, carrying on the priestly profession, are called Brahmanas, and though the other subdivisions are by lineage descendants from Brahmin fathers, yet the former do not link themselves in matrimonial relation with the latter. For example, by the name of Nagara Brahmana are meant only those Brahmins who are priests living on alms, and by the name Nagara only are meant those Brahmins who have accepted service under the government. or those who have been carrying on the Vaishya's profession. But it appears that such distinctions will not long continue in these days in Gujarat. Even the sons of the Nagara Brahmanas are nowadays getting English education and entering into government service or adopting some mercantile business. Even orthodox pundits of the old school, undergoing pecuniary difficulties, are sending their sons to the colleges of the English universities or making them choose the callings of Vaidyas, Kayasthas, and other non Brahmin castes. If the current of affairs goes on running in this course, then it is a question of most serious reflection. No doubt, how long more will the priestly class continue on India's soil? Those who lay the fault of attempting to bring down the supremacy of the priestly class at the door of any particular person or body of persons other than themselves ought to know that, in obedience to the inevitable law of nature, the Brahmin caste is erecting with its own hands its own sepulchre, and this is what ought to be. It is good and appropriate that every caste of high birth and privileged nobility should make it its principal duty to raise its own funeral pyre with its own hands. Accumulation of power is as necessary as its diffusion, or rather more so. The accumulation of blood in the heart is an indispensable condition for life. Its non circulation throughout the body means death. For the welfare of society, it is absolutely necessary at certain times to have all knowledge and power concentrated in certain families or castes to the exclusion of others, but that concentrated power is focused for the time being, only to be scattered broadcast over the whole of society in future. If this diffusion be withheld, the destruction of that society is without doubt near at hand. On the other side, the king is like the lion. In him are present both the good and evil propensities of the lord of beasts. Never for a moment his fierce nails are held back from tearing to pieces the heart of innocent animals, living on herbs and grass, to allay his thirst for blood when occasion arises. Again, the poet says, though himself stricken with old age and dying with hunger, the lion never kills the weakest fox that throws itself in his arms for protection. If the subject classes for a moment stand as impediments in the way of the gratification of the senses of the royal lion, their death knell is inevitably tolled. If they humbly bow down to his commands, they are perfectly safe. Not only so, not to speak of ancient days, even in modern times, no society can be found in any country where the effectiveness of individual self sacrifice for the good of the many and of the oneness of purpose and endeavor actuating every member of the society for the common good of the whole have been fully realized. Hence, the necessity of the kings who are the creations of the society itself. They are the centers where all the forces of society, otherwise loosely scattered about, are made to converge, and from which they start and course through the body politic and animate society. As during the Brahminical supremacy, at the first stage is the awakening of the first impulse for search after knowledge, and later the continual and careful fostering of the growth of that impulse still in its infancy. So, during the Kshatriya supremacy, a strong desire for pleasure pursuits has made its appearance at the first stage, and later have sprung up inventions and developments of arts and sciences as the means for its gratification. Can the king, in the height of his glory, hide his proud head within the lowly cottages of the poor? Or can the common good of his subjects ever minister to his royal appetite with satisfaction? He whose dignity bears no comparison with anyone else on earth, he who is divinity residing in the temple of the human body, for the common man to cast even a mere glance at his, the king's, objects of pleasure is a great sin. To think of ever possessing them is quite out of the question. The body of the king is not like the bodies of other people. It is too sacred to be polluted by any contamination. In certain countries, it is even believed never to come under the sway of death. A halo of equal sacredness shines around the queen. So she is scrupulously guarded from the gaze of the common folk. Not even the sun may cast a glance on her beauty. Hence the rising of magnificent palaces to take the place of thatched cottages. The sweet harmonious strain of artistic music, flowing as it were from heaven, silenced the disorderly jargon of the rabble. Delightful gardens, pleasant groves, beautiful galleries, charming paintings, exquisite sculptures, fine and costly apparel began to displace by gradual steps the natural beauties of rugged woods and the rough and coarse dress of the simple rustic. Thousands of intelligent men left the toilsome task of the ploughman and turned their attention to the new field of fine arts, where they could display the finer play of their intellect in less laborious and easier ways. Villages lost their importance, cities rose in their stead. It was in India again that the kings, after having enjoyed for some time earthly pleasures to their full satisfaction, were stricken at the latter part of their lives with heavy world weariness, as is sure to follow on extreme sense gratification. And thus, being satiated with worldly pleasures, they retired at their old age into secluded forests, and there began to contemplate the deep problems of life. The results of such renunciation and deep meditation were marked by a strong dislike for cumbrous rites and ceremonials, and an extreme devotion to the highest spiritual truths, which we find embodied in the Upanishads, the Gita, and the Jain and the Buddhist scriptures. Here also was a great conflict between the priestly and the royal powers. Disappearance of the elaborate rites and ceremonials meant a death blow to the priest's profession. Therefore, naturally, at all times and in every country, the priests gird up their loins and try their best to preserve the ancient customs and usages, while on the other side stand in opposition kings like Janaka, backed by Kshatriya prowess as well as spiritual power. We have dealt at length already on this bitter antagonism between the two parties. As the priest is busy about centralizing all knowledge and learning at a common center, to wit, himself, so the king is ever up and doing in collecting all the earthly powers and focusing them in a central point, that is, his own self. Of course, both are beneficial to society. At one time, they are both needed for the common good of society, but that is only at its infant stage. But if attempts be made, when society has passed its infant stage and reached its vigorous youthful condition, to clothe it by force with the dress which suited it in its infancy and keep it bound within narrow limits, then either it bursts the bond by virtue of its own strength and tries to advance, or where it fails to do so, it retraces its footsteps and by slow degrees returns to its primitive uncivilized condition. Kings are like parents to their subjects, and the subjects are the king's children. The subjects should, in every respect, look up to the king and stick to their king with unreserved obedience, and the king should rule them with impartial justice and look to their welfare and bear the same affection towards them as he would towards his own children. But what rule applies to individual homes applies to the whole society as well, for society is only the aggregate of individual homes. When the son attains the age of 16, the father ought to deal with him as his friend and equal. If that is the rule, does not the infant society ever attain that age of 16? It is the evidence of history that at a certain time every society attains its manhood when a strong conflict ensues between the ruling power and the common people. The life of the society, its expansion and civilization, depend on its victory or defeat in this conflict. Such changes, revolutionizing society, have been happening in India again and again. Only in this country they have been effected in the name of religion. For religion is the life of India. Religion is the language of this country, the symbol of all its movements. The Charvaka, the Jain, the Buddhist, Shankara, Ramanuja, Kabir, Nanak, Chaitanya, the Brahmo Samaj, the Arya Samaj. Of all these and similar other sects, the wave of religion, foaming, thundering, surging, breaks in the front, while in the rear follows the filling up of social wants. If all desires can be accomplished by the mere utterance of some meaningless syllables, then who will exert himself and go through difficulties to work out the fulfillment of his desires? If this malady enters into the entire body of any social system, then that society becomes slothful and indisposed to any exertion, and soon hastens to it ruin. Hence the slashing sarcasm of the Charvakas, who believed only in the reality of sense perceptions and nothing beyond. What could have saved Indian society from the ponderous burden of omniferous ritualistic ceremonialism, with its animal and other sacrifices, which all but crushed the very life out of it, except the Jain revolution, which took its strong stand exclusively on chaste morals and philosophical truth? Or without the Buddhist revolution, what would have delivered the suffering millions of the lower classes from the violent tyrannies of the influential higher castes? When in course of time Buddhism declined and its extremely pure and moral character gave place to equally bad, unclean, and immoral practices, when Indian society trembled under the infernal dance of the various races of barbarians who were allowed into the Buddhistic fold by virtue of its universal, all embracing spirit of equality, then Shankara and later Ramanuja appeared on the scene and tried their best to bring society back to its former days of glory and re establish its lost status. Again, it is an undoubted fact that if there had not been the advent of Kabir, Nanak, and Chaitanya in the Mohammedan period, and the establishment of the Brahmo Samaj and the Arya Samaj in our own day, then by this time the Mohammedans and the Christians would have far outnumbered the Hindus of the present day in India. What better material is there than nourishing food to build up the body composed of various elements and the mind which sends out infinite waves of thought? But if that food which goes to sustain the body and strengthen the mind is not properly assimilated, and the natural functions of the body do not work properly, then that very thing becomes the root of all evil. The individual's life is in the life of the whole. The individual's happiness is in the happiness of the whole. Apart from the whole, the individual's existence is inconceivable. This is an eternal truth and is the bedrock on which the universe is built. To move slowly towards the infinite whole, bearing a constant feeling of intense sympathy and sameness with it, being happy with its happiness and being distressed in its affliction, is the individual's sole duty. Not only is it his duty, but in its transgression is his death, while compliance with this great truth leads to life immortal. This is the law of nature, and who can throw dust into her ever watchful eyes? None can hoodwink society and deceive it for any length of time. However much there may have accumulated heaps of refuse and mud on the surface of society, still, at the bottom of those heaps, the life breath of society is ever to be found pulsating with the vibrations of universal love and self denying compassion for all. Society is like the earth that patiently bears incessant molestations, but she wakes up one day, however long that may be in coming, and the force of the shaking tremors of that awakening hurls off to a distance the accumulated dirt of self seeking meanness piled up during millions of patient and silent years. We ignore this sublime truth, and though we suffer 1,000 times for our folly, yet, in our absurd foolishness, impelled by the brute in us, we do not believe in it. We try to deceive, but 1,000 times we find we are deceived ourselves, and yet we do not desist. Mad that we are, we imagine we can impose on nature. With our short sighted vision, we think ministering to the self at any cost is the be all and end all of life. Wisdom, knowledge, wealth, men, strength, prowess, and whatever else nature gathers and provides us with are all only for diffusion when the moment of need is at hand. We often forget this fact, put the stamp of mine only upon the entrusted deposits, and pari passu we sow the seed of our own ruin. The king, the center of the forces of the aggregate of his subjects, soon forgets that those forces are only stored with him so that he may increase and give them back 1,000-fold in their potency, so that they may spread over the whole community for its good. Attributing all godship to himself, in his pride, like the king Vena, he looks upon other people as wretched specimens of humanity who should grovel before him. Any opposition to his will, whether good or bad, is a great sin on the part of his subjects. Hence, oppression steps into the place of protection, sucking their blood in place of preservation. If the society is weak and debilitated, it silently suffers all ill treatment at the hands of the king, and as the natural consequence, both the king and his people go down and fall into the most degraded state. and thus become an easy prey to any nation stronger than themselves. Where the society is healthy and strong, there soon follows a fierce contest between the king and his subjects, and by its reaction and convulsion are flung away the scepter and the crown, and the throne and the royal paraphernalia become like past curiosities preserved in the museum galleries. As the result of this contest, as its reaction, is the appearance of the mighty power of the Vaishya, before whose angry glance the crowned heads, the lords of heroes, tremble like an aspen leaf on their thrones, whom the poor as well as the prince humbly follow in vain expectation of the golden jar in his hands, that like Tantalus's fruit always recedes from the grasp. The Brahmin said, "Learning is the power of all powers. That learning is dependent upon me. I possess that learning, so the society must follow my bidding." For some days such was the case. The Kshatriya said, "But for the power of my sword, where would you be, O Brahmin, with all your power of lore? You would in no time be wiped off the face of the earth. It is I alone that am the superior." Out flew the flaming sword from the jingling scabbard. Society humbly recognized it with bended head. Even the worshipper of learning was the first to turn into the worshipper of the king. The Vaishya is saying, "You madmen, I, what you call the effulgent, all pervading deity, is here, in my hand, the ever shining gold, the almighty sovereign. Behold, through its grace I am also equally all powerful. O Brahmin, even now I shall buy through its grace all your wisdom, learning, prayers, and meditation. And, O great king, your sword, arms, valor, and prowess will soon be employed, through the grace of this, my gold, in carrying out my desired objects. Do you see those lofty and extensive mills? Those are my hives. See how swarms of millions of bees, the Shudras, are incessantly gathering honey for those hives. Do you know for whom? For me, this me, who in due course of time will squeeze out every drop of it for my own use and profit. As during the supremacy of the Brahmin and the Kshatriya, there is a centralization of learning and advancement of civilization. So the result of the supremacy of the Vaishya is accumulation of wealth. The power of the Vaishya lies in the possession of that coin, the charm of whose clinking sound works with an irresistible fascination on the minds of the four castes. The Vaishya is always in fear lest the Brahmin swindles him out of this, his only possession, and lest the Kshatriya usurps it by virtue of his superior strength of arms. For self preservation, the Vaishyas as a body are therefore of one mind. The Vaishya commands the money, the exorbitant interest that he can exact for its use by others, as with a lash in his hand, is his powerful weapon which strikes terror in the heart of all. By the power of his money, he is always busy curbing the royal power. That the royal power may not anyhow stand in the way of the inflow of his riches, the merchant is ever watchful. But for all that, he has never the least wish that the power should pass on from the kingly to the Shudra class. To what country does not the merchant go? Though himself ignorant, he carries on his trade and transplants the learning, wisdom, art, and science of one country to another. The wisdom, civilization, and arts that accumulated in the heart of the social body during the Brahmin and the Kshatriya supremacies are being diffused in all directions by the arteries of commerce to the different marketplaces of the Vaishya. But for the rising of this Vaishya power, who would have carried today the culture, learning, acquirements, and articles of food and luxury of one end of the world to the other? And where are they, through whose physical labor only are possible the influence of the Brahmin, the prowess of the Kshatriya, and the fortune of the Vaishya? What is their history? Who, being the real body of society, are designated at all times in all countries as base born? For whom kind India prescribed the mild punishments, cut out his tongue, chop off his flesh, and others of like nature, for such a grave offense as any attempt on their part to gain a share of the knowledge and wisdom monopolized by her higher classes. Those moving corpses of India and the beasts of burden of other countries, the Shudras. What is their lot in life? What shall I say of India? Let alone her Shudra class. Her Brahmins, to whom belong the acquisition of scriptural knowledge, are now the foreign professors. Her Kshatriyas, the ruling Englishmen. And Vaishyas, too, the English in whose bone and marrow is the instinct of trade, so that only the Shudraness, the beast of burdenness, is now left with the Indians themselves. A cloud of impenetrable darkness has at present equally enveloped us all. Now there is neither firmness of purpose nor boldness of enterprise, neither courage of heart nor strength of mind, neither aversion to maltreatments by others nor dislike for slavery, neither love in the heart nor hope nor manliness. But what we have in India are only deep rooted envy and strong antipathy against one another, morbid desire to ruin by hook or by crook the weak, and to lick dog like the feet of the strong. Now, the highest satisfaction consists in the display of wealth and power, devotion in self gratification, wisdom in the accumulation of transitory objects, yoga in hideous diabolical practices, work in the slavery of others, civilization in base imitation of foreign nations, eloquence in the use of abusive language, the merit of literature in extravagant flatteries of the rich, or in the diffusion of ghastly obscenities. What to speak separately of the distinct Shudra class of such a land, where the whole population has virtually come down to the level of the Shudra? The Shudras of countries other than India have become, it seems, a little awake, but they are wanting in proper education and have only the mutual hatred of men of their own class, a trait common to Shudras. What avails it if they greatly outnumber the other classes? That unity, by which 10 men collect the strength of a million, is yet far away from the Shudra. Hence, according to the law of nature, the Shudras invariably form the subject race. But there is hope. In the mighty course of time, the Brahmin and the other higher castes too are being brought down to the lower status of the Shudras, and the Shudras are being raised to higher ranks. Europe, once the land of Shudras enslaved by Rome, is now filled with Kshatriya valor. Even before our eyes, powerful China, with fast strides, is going down to Shudrahood, while insignificant Japan, rising with the sudden start of a rocket, is throwing off her Shudra nature and is invading by degrees the rights of the higher castes. The attaining of modern Greece and Italy to Kshatriyahood and the decline of Turkey, Spain, and other countries also deserve consideration here. Yet a time will come when there will be the rising of the Shudra class with their Shudrahood. That is to say, not like that as at present when the Shudras are becoming great by acquiring the characteristic qualities of the Vaishya or the Kshatriya, but a time will come when the Shudras of every country, with their inborn Shudra nature and habits, not becoming in essence Vaishya or Kshatriya, but remaining as Shudras, will gain absolute supremacy in every society. The first glow of the dawn of this new power has already begun to break slowly upon the Western world, and the thoughtful are at their wits' end to reflect upon the final issue of this fresh phenomenon. Socialism, anarchism, nihilism, and other like sects are the vanguard of the social revolution that is to follow. As the result of grinding pressure and tyranny, from time out of mind, the Shudras, as a rule, are either meanly senile, licking dog like the feet of the higher class, or otherwise are as inhuman as brute beasts. Again, at all times their hopes and aspirations are baffled. Hence, a firmness of purpose and perseverance in action they have none. In spite of the spread of education in the West, there is a great hindrance in the way of the rising of the Shudra class, and that is the recognition of caste as determined by the inherence of more or less good or bad qualities. By this very qualitative caste system which obtained in India in ancient days, the Shudra class was kept down, bound hand and foot. In the first place, scarcely any opportunity was given to the Shudra for the accumulation of wealth or the earning of proper knowledge and education. To add to this disadvantage, if ever a man of extraordinary parts and genius were born of the Shudra class, the influential higher sections of the society forthwith showered titular honors on him and lifted him up to their own circle. His wealth and the power of his wisdom were employed for the benefit of an alien caste, and his own caste people reaped no benefits of his attainments. And not only so, the good for nothing people, the scum and refuse of the higher castes, were cast off and thrown into the Shudra class to swell their number. Vasishtha, Narada, Satyakama, Jabala, Vyasa, Kripa, Drona, Karna, and others of questionable parentage were raised to the position of a Brahmin or a Kshatriya in virtue of their superior learning or valor. But it remains to be seen how the prostitute, maidservant, fisherman, or the charioteer class was benefited by these upliftings. Again, on the other hand, the fallen from the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, or the Vaishya class were always brought down to fill the ranks of the Shudras. In modern India, no one born of Shudra parents, be he a millionaire or a great Pandit, has ever the right to leave his own society, with the result that the power of his wealth, intellect, or wisdom, remaining confined within his own caste limits, is being employed for the betterment of his own community. This hereditary caste system of India, being thus unable to overstep its own bounds, is slowly but surely conducing to the advancement of the people moving within the same circle. The improvement of the lower classes of India will go on in this way, so long as India will be under a government dealing with its subjects, irrespective of their caste and position. Whether the leadership of society be in the hands of those who monopolize learning or wield the power of riches or arms, the source of its power is always the subject masses. By so much as the class in power severs itself from this source, by so much is it sure to become weak. But such is the strange irony of fate, such is the queer working of Maya, that they from whom this power is directly or indirectly drawn, by fair means or foul, by deceit, stratagem, force, or by voluntary gift, they soon cease to be taken into account by the leading class. When in course of time the priestly power totally estranged itself from the subject masses, the real dynamo of its power, it was overthrown by the then kingly power taking its stand on the strength of the subject people. Again, the kingly power, judging itself to be perfectly independent, created a gaping chasm between itself and the subject people, only to be itself destroyed or become a mere puppet in the hands of the Vaishyas, who now succeeded in securing a relatively greater cooperation of the mass of the people. The Vaishyas have now gained their end, so they no longer deign to count on help from the subject people and are trying their best to dissociate themselves from them. Consequently, here is being sown the seed of the destruction of this power as well. Though themselves the reservoir of all powers, the subject masses, creating an eternal distance between one another, have been deprived of all their legitimate rights, and they will remain so as long as this sort of relation continues. A common danger, or sometimes a common cause of hatred or love, is the bond that binds people together. By the same law that herds beasts of prey together, men also unite into a body and form a caste or a nation of their own. Zealous love for one's own people and country, showing itself in bitter hatred against another, as of Greece against Persia, or Rome against Carthage, of the Arab against the Kafir, of Spain against the Moor, of France against Spain, of England and Germany against France, and of America against England, is undoubtedly one of the main causes which lead to the advancement of one nation over another by way of uniting itself in hostilities against another. Self love is the first teacher of self renunciation. For the preservation of the individual's interest only, one looks first to the well being of the whole. In the interest of one's own nation is one's own interest. In the well being of one's own nation is one's own well being. Without the cooperation of the many, most words can by no means go on. Even self defense becomes an impossibility. The joining of friendly hands in mutual help for the protection of this self interest is seen in every nation and in every land. Of course, the circumference of this self interest varies with different people. To multiply and to have the opportunity of somehow dragging on a precarious existence, and over and above this, the condition that the religious pursuits of the higher castes may not suffer in any way, is of the highest gain and interest for Indians. For modern India, there is no better hope conceivable. This is the last rung of the ladder of India's life. The present government of India has certain evils attendant on it, and there are some very great and good parts in it as well. Of highest good is this, that after the fall of the Patliputra Empire till now, India was never under the guidance of such a powerful machinery of government as the British, wielding the sceptre throughout the length and breadth of the land. And under this Vaishya supremacy, thanks to the strenuous enterprise natural to the Vaishya, as the objects of commerce are being brought from one end of the world to another, so at the same time, as its natural sequence, the ideas and thoughts of different countries are forcing their way into the very bone and marrow of India. Of these ideas and thoughts, some are really most beneficial to her, some are harmful, while others disclose the ignorance and inability of the foreigners to determine what is truly good for the inhabitants of this country. But piercing through the mass of whatever good or evil there may be is seen rising the sure emblem of India's future prosperity. That, as the result of the action and reaction between her own old national ideals on the one hand and the newly introduced strange ideals of foreign nations on the other, she is slowly and gently awakening from her long, deep sleep. Mistakes she will make. Let her. There is no harm in that. In all our actions, errors and mistakes are our only teachers. Who commits mistaken, the path of truth is attainable by him only. Trees never make mistakes, nor do stones fall into error. Animals are hardly seen to transgress the fixed laws of nature, but man is prone to err, and it is man who becomes God on earth. If our every movement from the nursery to the death bed, if our every thought from rising at daybreak till retirement at midnight, be prescribed and laid down for us in minutest detail by others, and if the threat of the king's sword be brought into requisition to keep us within the iron grasp of those prescribed rules, then what remains for us to think independently for ourselves? What makes a man a genius, a sage? Isn't it because he thinks, reasons, wills? Without exercise, the power of deep thinking is lost. Tamas prevails, the mind gets dull and inert, the spirit is brought down to the level of matter. Yet, even now, every religious preacher, every social leader is anxious to frame new laws and regulations for the guidance of society. Does the country stand in want of rules? Has it not enough of them? Under the oppression of rules, the whole nation is verging on its ruin. Who stops to understand this? In the case of an absolute and arbitrary monarchy, the conquered race is not treated with so much contempt by the ruling power. Under such an absolute government, the rights of all subjects are equal. In other words, no one has any right to question or control the governing authority. So there remains very little room for special privileges of caste and the like. But where the monarchy is controlled by the voice of the ruling race, or a republican form of government rules the conquered race, there a wide distance is created between the ruling and the ruled, and the most part of that power, which, if employed solely for the well being of the ruled classes, might have done immense good to them within a short time, is wasted by the government in its attempts and applications to keep the subject race under its entire control. Under the Roman emperorship, foreign subjects were, for this very reason, happier than under the Republic of Rome. For this very reason, St. Paul, the Christian apostle, though born of the conquered Jewish race, obtained permission to appeal to the Roman Emperor Caesar to judge of the charges laid against him. Because some individual Englishmen may call us natives or riggers and hate us as uncivilized savages, we do not gain or lose by that. We, on account of caste distinctions, have among ourselves far stronger feelings of hatred and scorn against one another. And who can say that the Brahmins, if they get some foolish, unenlightened Kshatriya king on their side, will not graciously try again to cut out the Shudras' tongues and chop off their limbs? That recently in eastern Aryavarta, the different caste people seem to develop a feeling of united sympathy amidst themselves with a view to ameliorating their present social condition. That in the Maratha country, the Brahmins have begun to sing paeans in praise of the Maratha race. These, the lower castes, cannot yet believe to be the outcome of pure disinterestedness. But gradually, the idea is being formed in the minds of the English public that the passing away of the Indian Empire from their sway will end in imminent peril to the English nation and be their ruin. So, by any means whatsoever, the supremacy of England must be maintained in India. The way to effect this, they think, is by keeping uppermost in the heart of every Indian the mighty prestige and glory of the British nation. It gives rise to both laughter and tears simultaneously to observe how this ludicrous and pitiful sentiment is gaining ground among the English. and how they are steadily extending their modus operandi for the carrying out of this sentiment into practice. It seems as if the Englishmen resident in India are forgetting that so long as that fortitude, that perseverance, and that intense national unity of purpose by which Englishmen have earned this Indian empire, and that ever wide awake commercial genius aided by science, which has turned even India, the mother of all riches, into the principal mart of England, so long as these characteristics are not eliminated from their national life, their throne in India is unshakable. So long as these qualities are inherent in the British character, let thousands of such Indian empires be lost. Thousands will be earned again. But if the flow of the stream of those qualifier be retarded, shall an empire be governed by the mere emblazoning of British prestige and glory? Therefore, when such remarkable traits of character are still predominant in the English as a nation, it is utterly useless to spend so much energy and power for the mere preservation of meaningless prestige. If that power were employed for the welfare of the subject people, that would certainly have been a great gain for both the ruling and the ruled races. It has been said before that India is slowly awakening through her friction with the outside nations, and as the result of this little awakening is the appearance, to a certain extent, of free and independent thought in modern India. On one side is modern Western science, dazzling the eyes with the brilliancy of myriad suns and driving in the chariot of hard and fast facts collected by the application of tangible powers direct in their incision. On the other are the hopeful and strengthening traditions of her ancient forefathers in the days when she was at the zenith of her glory. Traditions that have been brought out of the pages of her history by the great sages of her own land and outside, that run for numberless years and centuries through her every vein with the quickening of life drawn from universal love. Traditions that reveal unsurpassed valor, superhuman genius, and supreme spirituality, which are the envy of the gods. These inspire her with future hopes. On one side, rank materialism, plenitude of fortune, accumulation of gigantic power, and intense sense pursuits have, through foreign literature, caused a tremendous stir. On the other, through the confounding din of all these discordant sounds, she hears, in low yet unmistakable accents, the heart-rending cries of her ancient gods, cutting her to the quick. There lie before her various strange luxuries introduced from the West, celestial drinks, costly well served food, splendid apparel, magnificent palaces, new modes of conveyance, new manners, new fashions dressed in which moves about the well educated girl in shameless freedom. All these are arousing unfelt desires. Again the scene changes, and in its place appear with stern presence Sita, Savitri, austere religious vows, fastings, the forest retreat, the matted locks and orange garb of the semi naked sannyasin, Samadhi, and the search after the self. On one side is the independence of Western societies based on self interest, on the other is the extreme self sacrifice of the Aryan society. In this violent conflict, is it strange that Indian society should be tossed up and down? Of the West, the goal is individual independence, the language money making education, the means politics. Of India, the goal is mukti, the language the Veda, the means renunciation. For a time, modern India thinks, as it were, I am ruining this worldly life of mine in vain expectation of uncertain spiritual welfare hereafter, which has spread its fascination over one. And again, lo, spellbound she listens. Iti samsare sphutatara doshaha kathamiha manava tava santoshaha. Here in this world of death and change, O man, where is thy happiness? On one side, New India is saying we should have full freedom in the selection of husband and wife because the marriage, in which are involved the happiness and misery of all our future life, we must have the right to determine according to our own free will. On the other, Old India is dictating marriage is not for sense enjoyment, but to perpetuate the race. This is the Indian conception of marriage. By the producing of children, you are contributing to and are responsible for the future good or evil of the society. Hence, society has the right to dictate whom you shall marry and whom you shall not. That form of marriage obtains in society which is conducive most to its well being. Do you give up your desire of individual pleasure for the good of the many? On one side, New India is saying, if we only adopt Western ideas, Western language, Western food, Western dress, and Western manners, we shall be as strong and powerful as the Western nations. On the other, Old India is saying, fools, by imitation, others' ideas never become one's own. Nothing, unless earned, is your own. Does the ass in the lion's skin become the lion? On one side, New India is saying, what the Western nations do is surely good, otherwise, how did they become so great? On the other side, Old India is saying, the flash of lightning is intensely bright, but only for a moment. Look out, boys, it is dazzling your eyes. Beware. Have we not then to learn anything from the West? Must we not need try and exert ourselves for better things? Are we perfect? Is our society entirely spotless without any flaw? There are many things to learn. We must struggle for new and higher things till we die. Struggle is the end of human life. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, as long as I live, so long do I learn. That man or that society which has nothing to learn is already in the jaws of death. Yes, learn we must, many things from the West, but there are fears as well. A certain young man of little understanding used always to blame the Hindu Shastras before Sri Ramakrishna. One day he praised the Bhagavad Gita, on which Sri Ramakrishna said, methinks some European Pandit has praised the Gita, and so he has also followed suit. O India, this is your terrible danger. The spell of imitating the West is getting such a strong hold upon you that what is good or what is bad is no longer decided by reason, judgment, discrimination, or reference to the Shastras. Whatever ideas, whatever manners the white men praise or like are good. Whatever things they dislike or censure are bad. Alas, what can be a more tangible proof of foolishness than this? The Western ladies move freely everywhere, therefore, that is good. They choose for themselves their husbands, therefore, that is the highest step of advancement. The Westerners disapprove of our dress, decorations, food, and ways of living, therefore, they must be very bad. The Westerners condemn image worship as sinful. Surely then, image worship is the greatest sin. There is no doubt of it. The Westerners say that worshipping a single deity is fruitful of the highest spiritual good. Therefore, let us throw our gods and goddesses into the river Ganga. The Westerners hold caste distinctions to be obnoxious. Therefore, let all the different castes be jumbled into one. The Westerners say that child marriage is the root of all evils. Therefore, that is also very bad. Of a certainty, it is. We are not discussing here whether these customs deserve continuance or rejection. But if the mere disapproval of the Westerners be the measure of the abominableness of our manners and customs, then it is our duty to raise our emphatic protest against it. The present writer has, to some extent, personal experience of Western society. His conviction resulting from such experience has been that there is such a wide divergence between the Western society and the Indian as regards the primal course and goal of each, that any sect in India, framed after the Western model, will miss the aim. We have not the least sympathy with those who, never having lived in Western society and therefore utterly ignorant of the rules and prohibitions regarding the association of men and women that obtain there, and which act as safeguards to preserve the purity of the Western women, allow a free rein to the unrestricted intermingling of men and women in our society. I have observed in the West also that the children of weaker nations, if born in England, give themselves out as Englishmen instead of Greek, Portuguese, Spaniard, etc., as the case may be. All drift towards the strong. That the light of glory which shines in the glorious may anyhow fall and reflect on one's own body, that is, to shine in the borrowed light of the great, is the one desire of the weak. When I see Indians dressed in European apparel and costumes, the thought comes to my mind. Perhaps they feel ashamed to own their nationality and kinship with the ignorant, poor, illiterate, downtrodden people of India. Nourished by the blood of the Hindu for the last 14 centuries, the Parsi is no longer a native. Before the arrogance of the casteless, who pretend to be and glorify themselves in being Brahmins, the true nobility of the old, heroic, high class Brahmin melts into nothingness. Again, the Westerners have now taught us that those stupid, ignorant, low caste millions of India, clad only in loincloths, are non Aryans. They are therefore no more our kith and kin. O India, with this mere echoing of others, with this base imitation of others, with this dependence on others, this slavish weakness, this vile, detestable cruelty, wouldst thou, with these provisions only, scale the highest pinnacle of civilization and greatness? Wouldst thou attain by means of thy disgraceful cowardice that freedom deserved only by the brave and the heroic? O India, forget not that the ideal of thy womanhood is Sita, Savitri, Damayanti. Forget not that the god thou worshippest is the great ascetic of ascetics, the all renouncing Shankara, the lord of Uma. Forget not that thy marriage, thy wealth, thy life are not for sense pleasure, are not for thy individual personal happiness. Forget not that thou art born as a sacrifice to the mother's altar. Forget not that thy social order is but the reflex of the infinite universal motherhood. Forget not that the lower classes, the ignorant, the poor, the illiterate, the cobbler, the sweeper, are thy flesh and blood, thy brothers. Thou brave one, be bold, take courage, be proud that thou art an Indian, and proudly proclaim, I am an Indian. Every Indian is my brother. Say, the ignorant Indian, the poor and destitute Indian, the Brahmin Indian, the Pariah Indian is my brother. Thou too, clad with but a rag round thy loins, proudly proclaim at the top of thy voice, the Indian is my brother, the Indian is my life. India's gods and goddesses are my God. India's society is the cradle of my infancy, the pleasure garden of my youth, the sacred heaven, the Varanasi of my old age. Say, brother, the soil of India is my highest heaven, the good of India is my good. And repeat and pray day and night. O thou Lord of Gauri, O thou Mother of the universe, vouchsafe manliness unto me. O thou Mother of strength, take away my weakness, take away my unmanliness, and make me a man.